Good morning, everybody. I'm Larry Weishuhn. If you enjoy real-world hunting and fishing talk, you're really going to enjoy listening to my good friend, Luke Clayton, and his guest for the next hour.
This is David Fox, and welcome to Outdoors with Luke Clayton and Friends. Luke has been a recognized outdoors writer for the past 3 decades and writes for a host of outdoor publications. Luke pens a weekly newspaper outdoors column that appears in over 40 Texas newspapers. Luke is on the pro staff of Pyramid Air, your one-stop shop for everything air gun related. Smoking techs, electric smokers, feel free to contact Luke through his website, catfishradio.org. Now let's join Luke and his guests for this week's show.
Well, thank you, my friends, for that nice introduction, and Mr. Weishuhn is right here with us. It's Campfire Talk time, as it's been for 18 and a half years, and I want to say good morning to you, Larry. I'm ready to visit with you, buddy.
You know what? I think I am too, Luke. We've been visiting over kind of in the past at a lot of different times about old times, but before we get into that, I need to mention DSC, Conservation Education, Advocacy, Hornady, Accurate, Deadly, Dependable, Stealth Vision, which is made just south of you, not very far there in Crockett, Texas, Unbelievable Optics, and then Vineyard Max, our friends that produce the deer feeders and the Vineyard Max bait that we use when we hunt, and the knives that I do. And then, of course, we've got Mossberg that's made here in Texas as well, too. They're rifles and shotguns. And Taurus that makes the Raging Hunters that I'm hunting with a bunch this year, and then their lever action rifles made by Rossi. And I brought those up last because there was a time many years ago, if you were a deer hunter, about the only thing you hunted with was a lever action. And I can remember not only going into some of the camps when I was small, sitting there and listening to their stories, but my granddad, on my mom's side, was a county commissioner, and my dad's side, his dad was in the cattle and horse business. And I remember going with them to some of the old-time ice houses and old-time hotels that were there in a little town called New Ulm, Texas, and sitting there and just being totally enthralled by people telling stories about the early days, and the early days then being the being the early years of the 1900s and the last days of the 1800s, about that area, about hunting, and about, I guess, about life when you get right down to it. That was so much fun, listening to those guys talk.
Those kind of memories, of course, you and I have discussed this a lot around real campfires, but it was a different era, an era that's not going to come back again, because those kind of people are not around anymore that had the experiences that these guys had. But my dad and mother moved from Baytown, Texas, down up to Red River County back in the 40s. And and my dad worked for Humble. He was a painter for painting those those tanks. But anyway, I guess he pulled some retirement out, I don't know, and bought a country store in Red River County back in the 40s. And you can only imagine what Red River County was in the 40s. I mean, I was born in 1950. So I remember a little bit of that era, before we had a telephone and before we had a TV. I remember that era.
Yes, sir.
But
yes,
I
sir.
also remember in that old country store, the smell. It was just, you had a stand-up wood-burning stove, one of those round stoves, and it was set in about a 4x4 rock base thing to keep the ashes from burning, the floor. But it had about 8 or 10 chairs and one stool built into the floor there. And you come in that place in the wintertime, Larry, and a lot of the guys were timber people, ranchers, farmers, whatever. They were all rural people for sure. They wouldn't even be there. They're back in the country. But the stories those old boys had, I never will forget. And that's what I would do when it's too wet to get out or whatever. I'd be sitting around listening. And I mentioned the smells. I think a lot of that was that old wood stove and the old wooden building. It wasn't like a grocery today. You go up,
no.
the walls had racks going up high, where you, it wasn't an end cap or anything like we do today, but it was, everything seemed to be around the walls and different little shelves. But I remember Dennis Collins. Now, we're talking about, Larry, back in about, I'm going to say 57, 58. I was about 7 or 8 years old.
Yes,
Dennis was a heck of a cowboy. He was in his 80s at that time, Mr. Collins. And he's inspired me on horses. He had loaned me a horse until I finally got enough money saved up to buy me an old horse, But Dennis, he was a logger, too. And he owned a couple of 100 acres down there right next to us. He was telling about the first log truck that he ever had. And that during that era, they still used big horses, draft horses, or mules to skid those logs, And I remember being with them. I was too little to partake of any of that, but I remember being there. Anyway, Dennis was talking about the first log truck, and this would have been in the 30s, I guess. He said he was just as serious as a heart attack. I remember this like yesterday. He said, I built a plank bridge over the Pecan Bayou. There's a creek down there. And he had a bunch of logs. He said, I had a bunch of logs. I wanted to put that truck to use because that thing would go 30 miles an hour, And he was serious as could be. And he said, but we had a little drop-off on the end of the bridge, the plank, out of oak planks. He'd sound like he built some kind of a structure over that creek where we could drive over it. Probably wasn't too deep. I mean, But he said, I saw that it was about 1.5 foot drop-off on the end of that plank. And I got to thinking, that thing had run a smooth road. He said, a haul road. He said, I figured I could get it up to about 30 and it'd just fly right over, I'll never forget this. And he said, I got it wound up, that truck, and I had a load of logs on there. And he said, that wheel dropped off. And he said, I'm lucky to be here, boys. He said, I lost that whole load right there in Pecan Bayou. But that kind of story, that's the kind of stuff that these guys would tell. And there was from an era that somebody sat down and tell you they tried something like that today, you'd think they'd lost their mind. Well,
Absolutely. I remember, you probably don't remember this, but years ago, we're in that era and long before we had the heavy equipment, there were a lot of stock tanks dug by mules with what we called a skidder, but it was actually like a big shovel.
Fresno. Fresno.
Yes. And, I found one of those not too long ago on our property that kind of grown all over, and they would attach that thing to a mule, harness it to a mule, and then you'd change the angle on the back. You'd walk on behind that mule and scrape that dirt out, and from that made stock tanks. And those guys would tell stories about that, and I remember telling about occasionally running across, there'd be like a creek, a little bit of a creek bottom, and they kind of slope that creek, try to make a dam, and they talk about all the airheads that they'd find. And even down there where I grew up, they talk about the buffalo bones that they would find. And you get to visit with some of those. I remember sitting around a table at I can't even remember, it's been so long, the name of the hotel there in New Ulm with my dad while they're playing dominoes, and those guys were talking about hunting black bear, in that area down around close to Houston and along the Colorado River. Those were unbelievable times, but you're right, those times will never come back again, and not at least in any kind of a future that I can think of. But those guys were such great storytellers. And to me, that's one of the things that we've lost in so many different places, is that now, times change, but those early hunting stories that those guys would tell, and about catching alligators and Oh my gosh! There's just so many stories that all of a sudden came back. I was covered up in a flood kind of thing with some of the stories that those guys were telling about. And I remember a story telling about how this older man got drunk on homemade wine and homemade whiskey and crawled into an alligator hole. Those alligators used to make holes into the banks, and crawled in there and grabbed an alligator and pulled him out by the tail, by golly.
Sounds like a song, lyrics to a song, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah, those people. Our lives are parallel in a lot of ways because.
Oh yes.
The era is one bond, but they're at between right out of Waller, Texas. Between Waller and going toward Hockley, that area.
Yes, sir.
I've talked about Papa Dinkins a lot. He left an awesome legacy, but he ingrained a lot of the old times talk and things that happened to him in my brain. I'd go down there, as you know. I'd spend a week around Thanksgiving with Papa Dinkins.
Right.
He had 2,400 acres. Back then, that was a lot of woods and. Well, A.J. Foyt owned. He sold him 300 acres of that place. So that's the area I'm talking about. But so I'd hunted every day, and he would buy a brand new Ford pickup every year, brand new, and he'd drive that worse than we drive ATVs and stuff. If a pine tree could be run over with it, his rule was to don't go around and run over it, And that truck looked like something that come out of a wrecking yard at the end of that year, but he'd give him a brand new one, sell him 4 or 5 cows and pay for it, That's the way he did. But so he had a daughter that was up in her 50s. She was a real estate lady that still lived with him. Well, so had a big old like a living room with 36 or 37 deer heads mounted. I would have given anything to have gotten one of those, but
oh my gosh, yes,
they were just deer. They weren't back then. They didn't know what a score was, I don't guess, but
and didn't care,
didn't give a hoot. And he hunted those he had a Damascus 10 gauge double barrel shotgun, and Papa Dinkins was a slightly built man. He might have weighed 100 and in his prime, maybe 145, 150 pounds, but he's like iron, He was a tough little dude, but so it had 2 bunks in his bedroom there. I'd get in one, it would turn in with the chickens, back didn't stay over. And he'd lay over there and he called me boy. I want to tell you about when I used to hunt wolves. Now, to this day, I don't know if he was talking about coyotes or I think he was talking about red wolves, I think.
He was talking about red wolves, yes, because that was an area that probably still has a few scattered around it.
In that area, yeah. Well, he was talking about going in a den, and he wasn't the type, he didn't have to fabricate stuff. He lived enough of it, But he said he said, I was the littlest one of the bunch. And those pups was in there, He said, they'd put me in. He said, I'd crawl in this den. I guess he did it once. I don't know. And drag these pups out. And I said, well, luckily the mother wasn't in there. He said, oh, no, it wasn't there, boy. But I got, they'd raise these pups back in the day. I mean, where are you going to hear something like that today, Larry?
Not anywhere I'm aware of.
Hey, Larry, they are Larry and all our friends. They're telling me I need to take a little quick break here. But will you hang with me? I'm just getting wound up on some of these old time stories.
Absolutely, I'd love to, Luke.
Friends, I want to tell you about an awesome camping destination, Wind Point Park on Lake Tawakoni. It's over on the far east side, kind of the northeast side of the lake. It's a pristine park. You can go there and view, I think they estimated a couple of hundred deer on that couple of hundred acres there. Cabins, beautiful RV park, fishing piers, docks. It's got everything you'd want in an outdoor destination. Check them out online at windpointparktx.com. Folks, I want to introduce you to Vineyard Max. Now, this is an awesome deer attractant, a food attractant that's made with hammer-milled grape skin, dried hammer-milled grape skins. It has a mixture of rice bran and also corn chops. Very effective. Deer can smell the scent of grapes from a long way, and it brings them in. I've used it in West Texas out with Larry Weishuhn, and we were out there where deer are not even exposed to grapes, and they came right in. Also, Vineyard Max has a very good line of game and fish feeders. Check them out online, vineyardmax.net. Well, friends, Mr. Larry Weishuhn is going to tell you about the finest hunting optics that we have ever found.
Look, these are called Stealth Vision. They come from Crockett, Texas. Dr. John McCall developed them. They're 34 millimeter tubes as opposed to the narrower tubes, so more light transmission. They have a little green light that comes on. That scope is leveled because that's when you want to pull the trigger. They have an optional lighted reticle as well too, and a whole lot of other products. And folks can learn more about them by going to stealthvision.com.
Folks, this segment is made possible by Smoking Tex electric smokers that I've been using a long, long time. Ultramatic feeders. I'd like you to check out the big bore air gun that I've done a great deal of hunting with. It's the Seneca Dragon Claw, 50 caliber, pressures up to 3,000 psi, and it looks like a conventional rifle. Wooden stock. I think you'll like the appearance, and I know you'll like the performance. It shoots not only bullets, but also air bolts as well, tipped with a broadhead. Check it out. It's the Seneca Dragon Claw. Well, friends, welcome back. It is Luke Clayton, and Mr. Weishuhn is still with me. You know, in the first segment here, we were talking about the old times and had so much fun, and I hope you enjoyed hearing some of Larry and I's old-time stories that we learned from some really old-time people. But we're going to continue. You know, Larry, I was just thinking, to put an era on some of these people that we remember. Just say, for instance, now Papa Dinkins. I was probably 14. Let's just say,
right.
So in 1964, that was when the time that I would spend down there with Papa Dinkins down in near Waller, Texas.
Yes, sir.
Okay. At that time, he lived to be 95 or 96, but at that time he was 88, about 88 years old. Imagine what he was born way back in the 1800s, you know?
Oh yeah,
just
so you're
imagine,
talking about the
yeah.
1870s,
Yeah.
the early 1880s kind of thing at the least.
Yes, sir. Imagine what those people that we were privileged enough to spend time with. Imagine what they call it the good old days, but I mean, I've spent enough time outdoors, and I know you have too. I would. I think it in some ways it was the good old days, but I will say this, and it's the truth. I think most people, including myself at this stage of life, I mean, I'd be challenged to survive in the good old days, working like those men back there in those days. I guess if you were a doctor or an attorney or something like that, but most people, most men made their living outside, didn't they? You know.
They really did. Where I grew up is out west of Houston. It used to be about 90 miles. Now it's probably about 40 miles. But as you were talking, I was thinking about visiting with my grandma Weishuhn, and she was born like in the 1870s, and that was before there was anything such as cars. Everybody went around on horseback and on buggies, and there were no telephones. There were no airplanes. And she lived during a time frame from that period of time to where there wasn't any electricity out in the country either at that point. She lived through that long period of time to where she saw put the first people on the moon, the first time men went to the moon. And you think about the technology changed and all those things, but that was the beauty of some of what we're talking about. People worked really hard. They ate well. They grew a lot of their own food kind of thing. But, there wasn't any telephone. There wasn't, at least not out in the country, and there wasn't any kind of television or anything like that. And so people did. They sat around on what they used to call the front porch or the gallery,
Gallery, yeah.
In the evenings with and sit there and tell stories, and maybe sit around a campfire, and they'd have a little fire or a wood stove in the house, like you mentioned earlier. I remember sitting around the wood stove at my grandparents' place, both my grandparents' place. No such thing as a television. Phones were just starting to come in, and I can remember the first phone that we had in our house was one of those. You got to go way back to where it hung on the wall. You had a spout coming out. You had your receiver that you talked into, and you had a deer that you heard in, and the phones were not numbers. It was like you'd had a ringer, and it was like two shorts and a long. So you'd ring it twice, just one turn, and then for the long you'd ring it twice, kind of thing. And you think about all that. I mean, we've come so far, but to me, my memories of all those is the stories, such as what you were telling about in the areas where now parts of Texas, where, my gosh, there hadn't been a black bear now in many, many years. Mm-hmm. Black bears were very common. Deer were not that common because people ended up, that's how they ate a lot, mm-hmm. and people hunted squirrels. And I can remember people talking about going on squirrel hunts to where, when squirrel season opened in that part of Texas, gosh, the people out of Houston would come out in wagons, mule-drawn wagons. They would set up hunting camps, and they'd be there for 2-3 weeks at a time. And again, those folks would sit around the fires, and they'd tell stories and of their parents and their grandparents, and somehow we, even though you and I both write a lot and we tell stories quite a bit, we never quite tell the stories like those guys did, because we did not have the opportunity to experience some of the things that they did.
That's true, Larry. My wife's grandmother, she's been passed away a long time, but she lived to be about like your mother, into her, upper 90s. I mean, lived a long time. I never will forget Mama. I was talking to her, and she was a country lady from Trinity County, raised out in the country, out from Groveton. And she was funny. She just always she'd run up in her 80s. She was working about a half-acre garden. I mean, that's the type of lady she was.
Oh yeah.
So she loved to tell the stories. And I always loved that area. Has always had lots of hogs, wild hogs. Trinity County down in there. So she said, "Yeah." I couldn't begin to mimic her, but the way she talked was comical. And she said, "Yeah, we used to camp out. We'd take a wagon sheet." And I said, "Whoa, what's a wagon sheet?" Mm-hmm. "Well, I think y'all call them tarpaulins now."
Right.
Right. She said, "We'd take a wagon sheet, lay it out, and there'd be 3 or 4 wagons. They would load their wagons up and go down to Caney Creek." That was a creek in Trinity.
Oh, yeah.
It's still there, anyway. And we would camp and fish for like 3 or 4. She got to tell me about a hog that got after them. Now, I don't know if it really got after them, but they did encounter a big boar, Now, I couldn't imagine a hog coming out of the woods and chasing people around, but maybe that did happen. But she said he ran through our camp. I always thought he spooked one, but who knows? But she told it. And I said, "Well, what did y'all eat?" This is the funny part. I said, "Oh, we ate good. The women were there, and we'd cook a big meal every evening, and then we'd just have, whatever during and we'd cook a breakfast, and then, I guess leftovers for lunch." And I said, "Well, tell me what you might have." "Oh, we'd cook just like you would at the cook stove at home on Sunday dinner." And I kept on hammering her, I said, "Well, describe a good meal." "Well, how about fried chicken, for instance?" And I said, "How long did y'all stay down there?" "Oh, a week or so, camped and fishing."
Right.
They had a good, clean creek, water and everything. I said, "Chicken, how in the world did you keep those chickens cold that long?" Boy, she laughed. She says, "Cold?"
Sure.
Said, "No, we took them down there in crates, alive."
Oh, yeah.
And we'd let them go and peck around, eat grasshoppers and stuff. And then when the men didn't do it, she said, when it got to be time for fried chicken, we women get out there and, we'd wring 4 or 5 chickens' necks and butcher them. and get the coals going, and we would fry chicken. I thought, boy, I could see my wife. Okay, go scratch us up 3 or 4 chickens now. Time to eat. I'm afraid I'd be eating peanut butter sandwiches,
And they had to have used lard.
Oh,
They
yeah.
kind of then, and as you were talking about that, I remember everybody had smokehouses.
Oh, yes.
When I was growing up, and you smoked your own hams and your own bacon and your own sausage and all that kind of stuff. But I remember going into one of my grandmothers. They had a big smokehouse, and they had these huge, big crocks of ceramic type crocks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd ask her, I said, Grandma, what'd y'all use those for? And she goes, oh, she says, remember, you don't remember, she said, we didn't have electricity. So there was no thing like keeping things cool. So we used to have what we called a beef club or a pork club. Every month somebody would kill a beef or a pork or whatever, and we'd all, kind of divide it out amongst ourselves. And I said, well, how did y'all keep that meat fresh? And he goes, well, what we'd do is we'd had a bunch of lard that we'd render from the hogs that we did. And she said, then we would fry it like steak and what you guys what y'all now call hamburger patties. Mm-hmm. And says we'd put them in that crock, or put lard in there, put a layer of the meat, another lard. And she said, that's how we kept those things where we could eat them. And then later when we got ready to eat them, maybe months or whatever later, we'd pull them out and heat them up. And she said, we had no things like a cooler or a refrigerator or a freezer or anything like that. So, all those kind of things seem to have been forgotten by the people, right, since we're talking about. And I don't know if they ever did anything like that with fish, but I guess fish they can catch, fresh.
Yeah, eat fresh fish. Well, you mentioned that, Larry, and I remember this. Lard used to come in a metal bucket.
Yes,
I think it had a handle on it. I'm not sure.
It did.
Yeah,
it did.
A metal, and it's probably, I don't know, it would look like, as I remember it, maybe 2 quarts or something like that of the volume of it. But my dad, we would have hog killing day, and he'd always pick a norther would blow through. He'd want it clear and cold, and we're gonna kill 2 or 3 hogs, whatever, the next day. And he made his own. He didn't smoke any meats back then. We really didn't have a smoke house. We had an old shed that they called that. I guess at one time it was a smokehouse, but he would make fresh sausage and fry up, a ton of that sausage. And so he'd kill those hogs, and you had all that lard.
Right.
That's the rendered down fat is what we're talking about.
Right.
And he'd take those buckets, have this bunch of sausage patties. Just a bunch of them. And he would lay a sausage down, pour that lard over it, more sausage, more lard. And then that was just common. And then when that would keep until through the summer, you'd eat it up by the, the summer. But then you just fish your sausage patty out of there, put it in the skillet, and fry it. That brought it back up to temperature. Looking back, it got it above 160, which would kill anything. But no, it tasted just as fresh as if you just cooked it. And look, what happened was that lard sealed off all the air, didn't it? Totally.
Absolutely, it did. And back then, as you were talking, you and I both like to hunt hogs. I don't know anybody likes to hunt hogs as much as you do, and I appreciate that. Yeah. But my granddad, I remember my dad and granddad buying big boars. I'm talking about that weighed, 200-300 or more pounds to start with, and we would castrate those, and we would feed them for 5, 6, 7 years sometimes. From what they told me, to where those hogs would. I remember butchering hogs that weighed 800-900 pounds. And from that they would get unbelievable amount of sausage and all that kind of stuff. But it was also because the fat that they had that they rendered into lard that they used for everything. But I get tickled sometimes. Somebody says, "What's the biggest hog you've ever seen or ever killed?" Well, I remember a kid. I got to be the one who killed some of those hogs with a .22 shot, shoot them in the forehead.
Yeah.
And I said, the ones that we put on the scales, I said, I remember some that they weighed, dressed, and they used intestine for the sausage casing, and
Yeah.
almost everything was used. But those dressed hogs would weigh like right at 900 pounds on a scale.
Yeah, that's right. Larry, hold that thought. We're coming back. We've got to take a quick break. We'll be right back, folks.
Folks, let's talk a little outdoor cooking. Let me tell you about an electric smoker that I've been using for 15 years, I guess. Smoking Tex electric smokers. If you're tired of staying up all night keeping that wood fire burning when you're barbecuing, give Smoking Tex a try. They're made to last a lifetime. You can check them out at smokingtex.com. That's SMOKINTEX.com. For seasonings, anything to do with outdoor cooking, all kind of jerky seasonings, sausage seasonings, Butcher Packer Supply. That's butcherpackersupply.com. I think the website is butcher-packer.com.
I want to tell you about a one-stop shop for everything related to game feeders and fish feeders, Ultramatic feeders. I've been using components and feeders from Ultramatic feeders for 20-something years, I guess. They have the remote, which you can remotely activate your feeder with, the timer, which is the most simple timer that I've ever found on a game feeder, and then the eliminator. Check these out. They are worked on actually on centrifugal force, and they seal off the corn supply so coons and squirrels can't get to the corn. Check them out. Ultramatic feeders, you could go online to ultramaticfeeders.com.
Big Sam left Seattle in the year of 92 with George Pratt, his partner, and brother Billy too. They crossed the
Friends, this segment is made possible by Platinum Cadillac and Chevrolet in Terrell, Texas. Stop by and visit with my buddy Mr. Justin Rudd and his team of experts and let them put you in a new Chevy pickup or a Cadillac or whatever you might be in the market for. Also, the Choctaw Hunting Lodge up in southeast Oklahoma. Check them out at ChoctawHuntingLodge.com. Also made possible by Pyramid Air, your one-stop shop for everything airgun related. Well, friends, thanks for staying with Larry and I. We wound up thinking about and talking about the old days that are not coming back. Larry, I do appreciate you taking the time, and this has been kind of fun, a lot of fun, reminiscing. But we're talking about pork, and you actually harvesting some hogs that weighed 800 or 900 pounds back, for lard. But hog killing day, that was a big deal. And when I was little, my dad, he wasn't a hog farmer, so to speak, but like y'all were, but he would raise, it seemed like about eight hogs each year and start them from pigs. He'd start with pigs in the spring and then feed the heck out of them. And then butcher, he'd wait for he'd watch the weather and get right after a norther blew in, a bluebird, what we would call a bluebird day, cold, low humidity, and that's when it'd be butchering time. I bet y'all did the same thing.
We did, and usually it started right about the first part of November or somewhere along in there. Sometimes in October it would get cool enough, but usually it was November, and it was a big deal because I grew up in an area where my dad's twin brother lived down the road, and his brother lived, and my grandparents lived over here, all kind of not that far apart when we get right down to it. But there are times it'd be hog killing days, and we'd been fattening hogs all the way through that time frame, and you'd go out and we'd get set up, and we might kill 8 or 10 different hogs on the same day. And what you would do is you'd kill the hogs, and they, again, so much of all the entrails and everything were used, but we had a great big old black cauldron that we boiled water in. And basically what you did is you boil water after you kill that hog, pour it on the skin, and then you would scrape the hair off and that upper layer of the skin that was there, the epithelius kind of thing, and to where that hog may be black when you laid him down there, but when you finished up with him, he was the prettiest white color you could ever imagine, and then from that, they would go from there. So that was the first step. Once you got that hog down, is to go ahead and scrape them. Then we'd pull out the entrails, and they would pull the intestine, and the small intestine, that became the casings that's used for the sausage.
Mm-hmm.
And then the large intestines they would use. Back then, you shot that animal. The first thing you did is you would stick him and collect all the blood, and they would utilize that blood to what they would call blood sausage, or in German it's called Blutwurst, and mix blood in with, and the large intestine, after it had been turned inside out, scraped,
Mm-hmm.
clean, same thing with that's where they made the blood sausage and did it in. So, and then they collected a bunch of the other stuff, and they would call it souse or souse, I think it was. It was kind of a little bit of everything that, maybe a little bit of liver sometimes, maybe a little bit of, bits and pieces of the hog that wasn't utilized elsewhere. So everything was utilized on that hog except for the hair.
And the squeal. That's right.
And the squeal. You're right. The squeal and the hair, don't do that.
You described what they used to call head cheese or souse
Head
meat.
cheese. There you go.
Souse
head
meat.
cheese. That's what I was trying to think
And some
of.
people
Right.
call it souse meat. Well, one thing they would do too is the head of the hog. They would boil that thing forever. And all that, there's a lot of meat on a hog head. There really is.
Yeah.
And then the other parts, I don't really know how they made it, but probably some of the I don't really know what else they put into it as far as organ meat. I don't know if they put that or not. Maybe they did, but there was a lot of meat, and then it would gel. It's
Right.
gel. It would coagulate, gel, I guess you would say. And then they put spices with it and. Souse meat, hog's head cheese. That's what they called it. Yeah, and
That is what it is. Right?
Hog's head cheese. You can buy that still at places, but yeah, they went to great length. Now, my daddy did not smoke the meats. Didn't have a way to smoke them, but I remember we had this shed, and he had a big old table laid out. He'd put wax paper down, and he'd salt it, sugar cure it. Pack it with sugar, Morton sugar cure. And I've done this later on a small scale with wild hogs a lot. I kind of quit doing that up to about 2 or 3 years ago. I used to even cure the hams, inject them, with the cure around the bone and pack them in that sugar cure. And I wanted to really learn how to do it just out of nostalgia, because I remember my dad be cold and it'd lay out there. Oh, it smelled good. Where all that sugar cure was on that meat, leave it out there for I don't know how long, probably a week or two, and let that sodium nitrite in that sugar cure work its magic, and that meat would be just as preserved, really, wouldn't it?
It really would. Basically, we used some sodium nitrate along with salt and pepper, and basically that was how we cured our bacon. You would pile it on, pile that mixture on top of it for a couple of days, and then you would hang it, and we'd smoke it for probably about a week, and not a hot fire, and we used everything from pecan to hickory and a few other things that they would come up with. But it seemed like, as I recall, that pecan and hickory wood were the two that we used primarily to add to smoke. And the same thing with the sausage. We would hang sausage, a whole bunch, kind of like they do these days, just a whole bunch of it, hang it and smoke it for several days. And God, that was good. Some of it they would allow to dry to where it would be dried sausage. Oh gosh, thinking about that right now makes me hungry.
Yeah, one of my sponsors is Butcher Packer Supply. You hear people hear me talking about it. The website, you can just Google Butcher Packer Supply and find it. But they have all that stuff, all the sausages, the casings, the seasonings. And there, I went through it. I wanted to learn exactly how it all worked a few years ago, and I did. I did a lot of home curing. And the hams, you get an injecting needle, and you need a slurry or a liquid on that with your sodium nitrite, which is called Bragg's powder. Pink powder is what a lot of people call it. But you mix that in there with they have kits you can order. And I'd mix that in there and inject that ham, especially around the bone. You have to do it, and that would be those wild hogs. Some of the best ham. The only thing there was hardly no fat, maybe a little bit on some of the hogs, but mostly I would do little hams that may weigh honestly, if you weighed them 6 pounds maybe off smaller hogs,
Right.
And it's easy to do, but it was fun for me, but back in those days, it was, if you wanted ham, I mean, that's the way you better know how to cure it, right?
Oh, yeah, all right. You're right. And unfortunately, I think a lot of folks, most of the folks these days have lost that art of knowing how to do those kind of things and really don't have the facilities to do it anymore. So, but to me, it's one of those things I've tried to pass on a little bit to my kids and my grandkids and saying, hey, this is how it was done many, many years ago. And, if you ever get in a bad situation where you have to worry about curing meat and all, this is the thing you need to know. And, hopefully we'll never get to that stage again. Hopefully we'll always have electricity where we've got, freezers and refrigerators and all those kind of things. But those kind of things, so many things, those how things were done many, many years ago before those existed, we've kind of lost that art of doing so. But it's good to recall those things every once in a while.
You bet it is, Larry. And we're talking about meat mostly, but my dad dug what he called I think he called it a spring house. I forget the exact.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of a mound of dirt, but he dug down in the ground, and I never will forget the hole. It was kind of a slanting type deal down into a hillside there, and he built a double wall and put sawdust between the two parallel walls, packed it with sawdust, and put shelves in there. And that's where he would, when he needed something, some meats at times, he'd put some meats in there, I guess if it was getting too warm or whatever. But canned goods. I mean, stack that thing full of canned goods, and I guess the cooler probably stayed, I don't know, underground and insulated like that. Into the summer, it probably stayed pretty cool, That's the way they preserve the vegetables and things like that,
Absolutely. People, when I was growing up, a lot of folks had what we call root cellars, and basically that's what that was.
That's what it was. He called it, that's what he called it, a root cellar.
Yeah, these would be about, they dig a hole about 8 foot down in the ground, and then, to where you could put a good cover of something over the top of it. And that's where they stored, they canned a lot of things. I remember spending a lot of time canning tomatoes when I was a kid with Mom and Dad, where we canned our own stuff.
Oh, me too.
And all those other kind of things. But that's where they stored that. And even as hot as it was where I grew up, you could go down into that root cellar, and it was always felt like it was in the 60s or 70s.
Yeah.
Compared to elsewhere. And that, too, again, helped preserve those things that they had preserved for future use in terms of food.
Larry, we have to take a quick break, but I want you to be thinking about the first hunting camps that you ever visited. And when we come back, we're going to talk about, we've got a little more time left in our show today. We're going to devote the whole show to talking about the olden days. For about the past decade, I've been hunting editor for Air Gun Hobbyist magazine. I think the only magazine devoted strictly to air gun shooting and hunting in the country. Well, in that length of time, I've learned quite a bit about big bore air guns and smaller calibers too. A spot to go to that if you're interested in air guns, you need to know about Pyramid Air. The website is PYRAMYD, pyramidair.com. They have anything and everything you need, from the guns themselves, the big bores or the smaller calibers, to the accessories. Just remember pyramidair.com, and there's a number when you get on the website if you need to call and talk to somebody. Give them a buzz, and they can fill you in on little details that you might need to know about shooting or hunting with big bore air guns.
The snowflakes fall as winter comes, and time just seems to fly.
Friends, this segment is brought to us by CVA muzzleloaders. In my opinion, the very best muzzleloaders in the world, the ones that I shoot. You can check them out online, cva.com. Kubi's Wild Game Processing and Kubi's Restaurant in Dallas, and Vineyard Max, maker of some awesome deer attractant and some very fine game feeders and fish feeders, located down in Nacogdoches, Texas. Check them out at vineyardmax.net. Well, friends, we're back, and Larry and I are reminiscing today. This show is a little bit different. We're talking about the olden days. And, Larry, we mentioned hunting camps. I remember as a boy in Red River County, the first deer camp that I ever visited. I remember it like yesterday, and my gosh, it's been a long time ago since I was 10 or 11 years old. Anyway, do you remember your first hunting camps that you might have visited or maybe was part of when you were little?
To start with, we, of course, growing up out in the country, where we hunted was probably less than a quarter mile behind the house.
Yep.
So initially we just kind of started going, just leaving the house. But my mom and dad had several friends, and they had a deer camp to where whenever hunting season got there, they moved into it. And I remember same thing as with my father-in-law later on when I got married. They had a deer camp down south of Columbus, and I didn't get to go to that one, but I got to go to the one that was friends of mom and dad's, and it was just basically a little shack, had a tin, no insulation or anything like that, had set up to where they had divisions so that the families could stay in. Each one of them, had their own little kind of bedroom thing, but they would get there like the week before the season opened up, and they would start cooking, and they would start scouting, and usually every year the night before deer season, all their friends gathered there, and we had what was called a big deer stew. Now, these were different days back, a long time ago, where each year one of the families, it was their job to go out and poach a deer before the season opened.
I've been there, and yeah.
So they would have deer meat, for the night before the deer season.
Yep.
And they also occasionally, one of my dad's friends decided he wanted to, he was going to become a brewer. A brewer of homemade beer. And the things that I recall is they made a big batch of beer, put it in bottles, and it just so happened they were going to, have it the first night of the deer season. Well, everybody got there the night before the deer season opened, and it was cold. I mean, it was in the 20s, which was not unusual back then.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they got that big stove, like you were talking about earlier, kind of cherry engine red, to where everybody's kind of hanging along the edges of that little shack on, and all of a sudden, I guess those bottled beer got a little bit warm, and all of a sudden it started, that beer started popping the caps off of it. It sounded like there was somebody with semi-automatic in there, and it was spewing beer all over the place. And that's one of my memories of one of the first real deer campsites, because at the time I was probably about maybe 6 or 7 or something like that at the very oldest. And but I remember all that beer going all over the place. Everybody got covered up with homemade beer, and I don't think they ever even get to drink any of it. It all popped out when it got hot in there.
The good old days. My Uncle Stuart, I've told you a lot about him. He was a home brew maker. He had an old crock. It was about 5 gallons, I guess it was, an old crock. And I helped him when I was, I say, 12, 14, 15 years old. I got up about 17 or 18. I don't know how old I was. I was probably about 17, maybe 16. But I was helping him. He had this old capper that's you pull the lever down and you buy the caps, and it would seat that cap.
Yeah.
You pull it down and it'll lock
right.
that. So he'd made, I don't know, he would get them old Falstaff bottles and boil them and scrub them out,
Oh, yeah.
And get them all, use the long, because that's all they had, long necks that I remember back then.
Right.
But he enjoyed a cold brew, he did. So, and also, I guess pretty good at making them. So I kind of learned the process by helping him, When I was about 17, he said, "Okay, boy." He said he had this old Frigidaire freezer out in the garage, or not a garage, it's just a little old white house deal back there. And the top of it, you open that handle, open the door of it, and his ice froze up about 4 inches all the way around the inside.
Of course,
he said, put us probably wouldn't hold more than 3 or 4 with all that ice in there. Put us some of these bottles in there. Let's get them real cold, boy. And I said, "Oh, wait a minute. I might get to taste some of this stuff that I've been working on. I was about 16. I don't know. Of course, he didn't tell anybody. This was just between me and him.
Oh, no, no, that's just between y'all.
Oh, yeah. He said, I think it's about time you sample some of this. And just one's all you're going to get. I said, oh, that's probably be more than enough. Anyway, I put those 3 or 4 of them, I don't know, up in that old freezer. And then we went about our business cleaning the bottles up. And he had them old cardboard boxes, cases that they come in back.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
They open from the middle and they opened up. You remember them. So,
I remember them well.
So we had those things stacked up high. I don't know how many cases he'd made, a bunch. And then 30, 40 minutes later, he said, we were kind of, get a little bit winded from all that work. He said, let's go sit down back there, boy, and I'm going to let you sample some of this. And I never will forget. He pulled those things out of that old freezer, or I did, and I was the server,
Oh yeah.
He had an opener, and I'll swear, a smoke like a blue looking smoke come up on top of that thing, and I said, he said, now this is going to be some of the best because it's got that smoke.
Oh yes.
What
right.
that meant, I don't know, but I never will forget. I enjoyed one of the first. Maybe the first cold beverage that I ever had. I sat out there. I thought, and I don't know what it tasted like. Probably drink it today. You'd want to go for something else, but maybe it was good. I didn't have anything to compare it to. Larry, I tell you what, we could go on and on, but our show, friends, today, as you've noted, is somewhat different. Usually we're talking fishing, and I'm interviewing all kind of people, giving some tips, and we're going to be back to that next week, I promise you. But this week, I think I've had a great time, Larry, just reminiscing and talking about the old days that are not going to come back, and also days that some people, probably many people, think, wow, things were different back then,
Well, if they were listening, I think quickly came to the realization that was the case. But it's been so much fun. Just, one of these days we'll have to come back and do some more of these kind of things and tell about some of our early experiences as far as actual hunting or our first fishing trip. We've done some of that, but we'll try to do that again in the future. But, it's that time of the year to start making serious memories. You've been doing fishing all summer long. Now it's time to get ready for hunting season.
That's right.
Create those your own old memories down the way.
That's right. The dove season 3 weeks away, and I'll sign off here. Mr. Nathan Wofford up around east of Lake Levon. He and his partner, they farm about 10,000 acres. But they have some openings, Nathan does, for dove hunting, and it's well organized up there. It's can be hard to find a good place to hunt dove, but that 10,000 acres, there's going to be some hot spots and some not so hot spots, and they stay on top of those doves. So anybody that wants to go dove hunting, we're going to get Nathan back next week and let him give us an update. That'll be a couple weeks before the season opens, I guess. But send me an email, catfishradio.org, O-R-G. I don't have his contact information handy, Nathan's, but if you're up in North Texas and you're looking for a place to hunt doves, just go to catfishradio.org, and it says email Luke. Send me an email, and I'll hook you up with him. And Larry, thanks again, buddy. I had a great time.
Always a pleasure.
Folks, that about wraps our show up for this week. I've enjoyed being with you, and I hope you've had a good time, too. And, folks, we're also brought to you by the Choctaw Hunting Lodge up in southeast Oklahoma, located about, 45 minutes west of Hugo, Oklahoma, owned by the Choctaw Nation. It's about 45,000 acres of awesome mountain, country, hills, valleys, loaded with game. Lots of eastern turkey, and they do eastern turkey hunts if you're looking for a spot to hunt turkey in the spring.